Ed again, and this is Atheist, the Bird with No Cage, as you know if you've already found it. Today is February 9, 2020. Amazing. The Grapefruit League for Baseball is going to start soon. Glenn and I are both big Blue Jays fans. We watch every game. So probably not their grapefruit part of it, but I think the league starts right at the beginning of March. No, the end of March. Hey?
22nd of February.
The league starts?
The Grapefruit League.
No. I mean the real league. It's at the end of
March.
the end of March. Oh yeah. Okay, I was wrong. Not the beginning of March, the end of March. We're looking forward to that. Okay, until very recently, I didn't really have a plan for what I was going to talk about today, but what I've been dealing with lately is the problems of the conversations with Christians that I run into and I see happen, on the shows I watch, the Atheist Experience, especially is a favorite show. I guess another favorite YouTuber is Seth Andrews. He has a podcast called The Thinking Atheist. They're favorites of mine. Anyway, when I see those and listen to Christians talk, and especially on the Atheist Experience, I observe what seems to me to be repeated examples of religious people being disingenuous. I hesitate to say they're outright lying, but it seems like they twist the truth and do the intellectual tap dance when they get asked a difficult question. Like when you ask them questions about, the people I'm talking about have the basic stance that the Bible, we're talking about Christians in the Bible is the inerrant word of God. Some of them will say, maybe there's small errors or something, but pretty much they say, no, it's the absolute word of God. But what I feel when they're defending their point, they seem to me to be willing to exaggerate and or be disingenuous, i.e. tell non-truths, tell lies. It's kind of like it's okay to lie if you're doing it for, to promote religion, the Bible, and or God. And I have a real problem with that. Now I admit that some of my perception of them doing this thing may come from my bias, because as soon as they start talking about God, they're talking about something that I think is imaginary, that it just doesn't exist. But it's the part about, are they being, I think some of them, I've heard some of them, a few at least, say they are willing to lie for God, because the lie is secondary. The important thing is to support this God concept. For instance, the preacher that I talk with regularly on a weekly basis, have for a couple of years now, one of the discussions we get into one time, I pointed out how one of the things that bothered me about religion was that it was willing to use fear and fear tactics to try to especially convince children or anybody really, the biblical stuff is true and or should be believed. So I brought up this idea that they use fear, the idea of you got to believe or you're going to hell, and that starts with indoctrinating children, and that's very fundamental part of the teaching, that you have to believe or the consequences are severe. So he said, there's nothing wrong with using fear to teach. And I said, I disagreed. I can't imagine using fear to get somebody to understand something. I just don't see where that happens. And he tried to make a case for, he said, well, we do that all the time. We teach children not to cross the street or to look both ways before they cross the street, and we use fear to do that. And I went, well, hold it. Do you mean that the reason that we look both ways when we cross the street is because of fear? And he says, yes. And that's just not true. I've come to many intersections, and I mean, sometimes we just depend on our hearing. We know there's no traffic coming. But often we, it's a one-way street, the traffic comes this way. I take a look, see if there's any traffic coming. The point is, I feel absolutely no fear when I do that. And he was insisting that, yeah, that's why we look both ways, is the fear of a car coming that could hit us and run over us. For me, that's an example of being disingenuous, because I think he knows as well as I know that when I come to an intersection and I look up the street, maybe both ways, to look for traffic, there's no fear involved. It's just, as you come, the street is where cars go, and I do admit cars, for pedestrians, cars can be dangerous, but when I do that, I stop at the edge of the street and look both ways. I just don't agree that there's this, oh boy, maybe there's a car coming, a car could run over me. There's nothing like that. I just check to see if there's any traffic. It's a very practical thing to do. So that's an example of where he just kept doubling down on this idea that that's using fear in everyday life. And so there's nothing wrong, I guess he was claiming there's nothing wrong with scaring the shit out of kids with the hell idea. And I wonder, would he be okay for, have you ever heard of, to shotgun a little bit, but the fear, or the concept of fear certainly is in the United States, there's these things they call hell houses. And what some Christian communities do is take kids to these places when the kids are maybe somewhere between 7 or 8 and 11 years old, 12 years old. And these are places, buildings, they're kind of like, they remind me of those, when you go to a fair, sometimes they have a house of horrors or whatever like that, and you go in there and things jump out at you, and there's people screaming and maybe horrible scenes of somebody supposedly being killed or tortured or something. But what they do is they use these things, and they have actors at these hell houses. They have actors in there, and they are pretending they are in hell, suffering, burning, the classical hell with the fire and everything. Scare the living shit out of these kids. And then immediately after that, they ask the kids if they want to accept Jesus into their lives, which of course they've been told will save them from this horror that they're pretending exists. Now, I think, I'm trying to be fair here to the preacher, I think he would argue doing that, scaring the hell out of these kids, is justified because hell is a real thing. If you can prevent a kid from going to hell by scaring them, making them believe the thing that they have to believe to avoid hell, he would justify that and say, and I don't know, do I disagree with him? If hell were real, if I thought hell were real, would I do that? I don't know. I might agree with it if I thought hell were real. The problem is, even from the religious, you're brought up and you You learn to believe this, the heaven and hell thing, until you can justify your belief that it's real. You got a problem. And that's many of my conversations. They don't get by this thing. I mean, I had Jehovah's Witness at the door the other day, and we had a long chat. They want to talk about the Bible. And Jehovah, they call, I think, I'm not sure, I think Yahweh and Jehovah are supposed to be the same. But I said to them, I don't believe that this Jehovah is real, and if it's not real, it can't do anything. It can't help us with our lives or do anything to us. It just can't do anything. And so I said to the woman, what is Jehovah? What is it? Is it a person? And she said, it's a spirit. Well, I said, what about, is a spirit like other gods, like Allah is a spirit? And she said, yes, it's like that. But, of course, the one that she believes in is the real spirit, the real God, sort of thing. You know, and you go from, I mean, saying it's a spirit doesn't help me a damn bit, because my next question is, what the hell's a spirit? I've never, in fact, I did ask her that. That's right. I asked her that too, and she said, well, spirits, for example, are like angels. Angels are spirits too. So I got, holy shit. So gods are spirits and angels are spirits. So angels and gods are they the same thing or something? My whole question is, when I'm having these discussions with people, they go, like this woman, I mean, she didn't appear to be making this shit up. Well, actually, I mean, she has it like this. She's on a script, right? And if you ask what God is a spirit. What are spirits? The spirits are like angels. What are angels? I think we're going to come around in a circle. Angels are spirits. I don't know. My whole point is, when I'm having these conversations with people, my stance is I am trying desperately to be totally honest, brutally honest. And if I come to a point where I don't know the answer to something, I don't want to just try to, bulldoze my way through it. And I'm happy with that. If it comes to a thing that I don't know something about, and I don't know the answer, I'm happy to say, I don't know. That is a very frustrating thing it appears to be frustrating for religious people, because they claim that they do know, and if we don't know, that means that they're right. And I just don't get that. With this, I guess I want to push on this idea of defining God. I'm stuck with this thing that I get in these conversations, and I mentioned before my friend David, who is a Jehovah's Witness. I haven't seen him in quite a while. I think he's blown me off, because he and I got along well as long as we were talking about the Bible and Bible stories and stuff like that. But in the last conversation we had, I said, I brought up the point, well, I'm fine with talking about Bible stories, and especially parts of the Bible that I know fairly well. I've read most of the Bible. I've read all of the New Testament several times, and the first 5 books of the Old Testament I kind of know a little bit. I've read them several times. I'm happy to have discussions about that, but the problem is, he's going on about Jehovah and what Jehovah does and how we have to love Jehovah and all of that. So in this last conversation, I said, look, one thing we never talk about is the fact that I don't have a belief that this Jehovah is real. I think it's imaginary, and I'd like for you to explain to me, first of all, what it is, what Jehovah is, and why you believe that exists in some way or can influence our lives or anything like that. So unless we can show that it actually exists, then obviously, well, if it does not exist, doesn't matter what we believe, if it does not exist, it can't do anything. Can't change my life, and me bowing down or saying prayers to it or anything else makes zero difference if it doesn't exist. And so I guess I'm playing with two ideas. The one idea is how honest religious folks are willing to be about their beliefs and that sort of thing. And I find a lot of disingenuous, I've said it before, in the discussion with David one time, he brought up a Bible story, and he wanted to talk about the crucifixion. And, excuse me. And so I go, okay, what about it? So he's telling me this story about how, I don't know what it had to do with anything, but I know it's a Bible story that I happen to know, that when the crucifixion happened, sometime in there was a big earthquake, and the graveyards threw the bodies out of the graves. So he brings up that story, and I go, okay, it's possible that there was a big earthquake and a graveyard could have been disturbed and some remains could have, been thrown out of graves. But the problem is, immediately then, the Bible story continues and says, these people, these bodies got up out of their graves, and I don't know, many of them, and walked into Jerusalem. And the Bible then says, and many people saw them, and that's basically the end of the story. So we have to believe that's the zombie story, right? Not only Jesus was a zombie, but these dead bodies got out of graves and walked into to Jerusalem. And so when I hear a guy like David or the preacher telling stories like that, whoops, somebody stepped on the cat. My question is immediately, do they really believe that? I'm suspicious. I'm really hesitant to say people are just not being honest, but in David's case, as soon as I brought up he was fine talking about this earthquake happened and these bodies were thrown out of the graves, but as soon as I brought up the continuation of the story where these dead people got up and walked into town and walked around Jerusalem, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He sloughed it off as, well, that's a story that, but I'll talk about something else, sort of thing. So I guess the bottom line here is I'm questioning how honest and forthright religious people are, and of course it's going to be different with every one of them, just like somebody who's an atheist. I've certainly heard atheists say stupid, believable things too. When I'm in the conversation, I'm desperate to be honest. If I see myself hedging on anything, put a stopper on it right away, go, whoa, why am I talking like that? It doesn't happen because I've researched this thing. But this whole thing comes down to the ingenuousness, the honesty, the people that I have talked to that are religious people, and especially Christian, most of them are Christians. Their stories don't jive, they don't tell the same stories, but they have this thing where they're generally don't claim that anything or very few things are absolutely true in that kind of way. I have my experience to go by, and that's it. So I guess that's what I just want to throw out. If any religious folks are hearing this, I'd just like to ask you to ask yourself, when you discuss what you believe about the Bible and this God thing and everything, are you being absolutely ingenuous, honest? Or are you just trying to, it feels as though often the preacher, for example, is just trying to win the argument. And I desperately try to avoid saying anything for the purpose of winning the argument. I don't care. I'm willing to discover that what he's saying is true, and I hope to be able to show what I'm saying is true. But just look at the evidence and decide. So for me, being honest, even if I'm speaking with somebody that I find are being a little disingenuous, it's still important to me to be, because if it gets to the point where the thing is going down the rabbit hole and going to hell, I'll just say, okay, let's, I don't really want to discuss this anymore, because I don't really want to say you're being dishonest, because that's just an accusation, and I don't like to do that. Anyway, my name is Ed. We decided that today again was February, what did we say? The 9th?
9th.
February the 9th, 2020. And this video is about the idea of honesty in the discussion between religious folks and non-religious folks. That I think it's really important that both sides enter the discussion with honesty. And part of the reason that I think I'm able to do that is because I am no longer afraid of losing arguments or having to change my beliefs. I've had to do that several times in my life, change my beliefs, stuff that I believe very strongly, and then find out, whoa. Not necessarily that it was wrong, but that I did not have good reason to believe that. And anything that I don't have good reason to believe, I have to be able to admit that indeed I don't have good reason to believe it, even if I do believe it. Okay, my name's Ed again, and that's all we're doing for today. Thanks a lot.